Hey guys, it's Pastor John. So glad you're able to join me today as we continue our Lunch with St. Luke series. If you recall in our last episode from yesterday, Zechariah, a great guy, Zechariah and Elizabeth, a terrific couple, dealt with the issue of barrenness and really the sadness of not being able to have children. Zechariah is a priest, and he has been given a very special task. In fact, a task that would likely be a privilege he'd only have maybe once in his entire life. Is he has been called to go actually into the temple, into Herod's temple, and to be able to be the one who actually burns incense there in the temple. And while he's in there, he gets an encounter with a visitor. In fact, if you remember, we just briefly introduced this last time. The archangel Gabriel shows up to meet with Zechariah. Now, I was going to show, some kind of picture or artwork of Zechariah, but honestly, the ones I saw, I wasn't that impressed. I think that artists sometimes have a hard time imagining things that are outside of our understandably outside of our normal experience. They have a hard time really visualizing that. So we just need to use our imaginations and picture what it would be like to be this older man, this priest, all dressed up in his special fineries as he's in there to really give this very special gift of burning incense. It would have been a memorable time, something which he would have really looked forward to perhaps for years and years. And now that he's able to do this, he has this very, very special visitor show up, something which would have been startling, which would have indeed been rather frightening to have this kind of supernatural experience. So, in chapter 1, in verse 13, the angel Gabriel speaks to Zechariah. It says, "But the angel said to him, 'Do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. There will be joy and delight for you, and many will rejoice at his birth.'" I want to pause there right after verse 14. Let's look at just the first part of the angel Gabriel's message. First off, what a blessing for this couple. Well, what an encouragement. I like the name they're supposed to name him as well. And this idea that there's going to be joy, there's going to be delight. Now we know that joy is defined as relational happiness. It's that kind of gladness and happiness that can be experienced in relationship when you know that someone is glad to see you. And that kind of relational joy often happens in families. In fact, to have a new baby, there would just naturally be a great joy. But for that joy and delight, think of how amplified that would be after years and years and years of trying to have a baby, of trying to get pregnant and never being able to be blessed with a child. This would be a very special thing for them, and many will rejoice at his birth, not only because of God's answer to their prayer, but also because of the message that John is going to bring. I also do want to make just a side note here. It is interesting, of course, that God has such plans for John, and we're going to see here as we move into the next verse, in verse 15, that he has a very specific purpose for John, even before John's born. Chapter 1, verse 15, it says, "For he will be great in the sight of the Lord, and will never drink wine or beer. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit while still in his mother's womb." Now, a few things to see about that. First off, a terrific thing to know that your child's going to be great in the sight of the Lord. To know that God has a plan for him right from the beginning. And he will never drink wine or beer. Now, I know some of us think that that's why he was called John the Baptist, but then that isn't why he was called John the Baptist. In fact, the idea of not drinking wine or beer likely means that even from birth, he is going to be seen as one who has a Nazirite vow, much like Samson the judge. A Nazirite vow is out of the Torah, out of Numbers chapter 6, and it was really a special kind of Jewish, Hebrew, Israeli monasticism, kind of becoming a sort of Torah monk. And the idea would be that this would be a vow somebody would take, promise that they'd make for a temporary period of time. And during this temporary period of time, they would abstain from alcohol. In fact, they would abstain even from grapes. So they'd avoid alcohol altogether and anything having to do with that. They would abstain from grapes. They'd avoid vineyards. On top of that, they were not to touch dead bodies, even if that meant that they wouldn't be able to help bury their own parents. And they also wouldn't cut their hair. So I don't know if John was completely a Nazirite or not, but it seems to be that's what is being implied here. But rather than this being kind of a voluntary choice, a vow that he pursues throughout his life, this is something which, the choice is made for him before he's even born. It's something which is going to be a lifelong, permanent thing for John. And then also notice he will be filled with the Holy Spirit while still in his mother's womb. Now you can look in the Old Testament and see all kinds of examples of the Holy Spirit coming upon people to give them power for specific tasks. You can see that. But this is something which is very special, which is very, very unique here. The Holy Spirit of God, the third person of the Trinity, is really coming on to the person of John the Baptist before he's even born. Before he's even born, he's being empowered for mission, for God's purposes. What an incredibly startling thing to see. And also, I do think it's probably pretty important for us to recognize that God sees us and cares about us and has plans for us even before we're born. That indeed we are human beings from the point of conception, even before we experience our first birthday. But there's verse 15, and then as we continue the angel Gabriel's message here, in verse 16, he will turn many of the sons of Israel to the Lord their God. Oh, what a promise. What a purpose. And he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah. Now, you can perhaps remember at the very end of the Old Testament, the very end of the book of Malachi, there's that promise that Elijah is going to return and that this next part is going to happen, to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children. I just heard Jim Wilder give an interview really talking about that idea, about how important those family relationships are, of how important that the modeling of life that goes on in family, and of how key that is, of how important that is to being to really becoming community, to really being the people of God. So John was going to have a ministry that was going to really focus on building the community of the people of God, building the family of God. So to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children as he fulfills this prophecy, this promise of Elijah's ministry, really being restarted, of Elijah's ministry, really making ready for the Messiah. And so, again, to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the disobedient to the understanding of the righteous, and to make ready for the Lord a prepared people. To make ready for the Lord a prepared people. I do often hear people have end times questions about the second advent, about the return of Jesus. But often one of the things that we miss is that if we're thinking about the return of Jesus, really where our thoughts should go is to be ready, to be a prepared people. We see John the Baptist preparing the people and making them ready for Jesus's first advent. And as we think forward to the second advent, for us to be a people who are prepared, people who are ready for the Lord, for God to do His work in our hearts, as He really, empowered John the Baptist to do that kind of work in preparing the people of Israel during Zechariah and Elizabeth's time. So, hey, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. So thankful that we had this time together. And let's just specifically keep in our prayers this week that God would prepare us, that He would make us a people who are ready for Jesus' return. So, hey, look forward to seeing you guys next time, and keep following Jesus.